Council and one of Hawaii's oldest advocacy organizations. Kokua Council advocates, informs, and educates to improve laws, policies, and practices impacting the well-being of our community, especially the most vulnerable among us. A year ago, weeks before the governor issued his first stay-at-home order, Kokua Council held public forums to focus upon the vulnerability of care and nursing home residents and their caregivers. When the election campaign stalled last spring because of the pandemic, Kokua Council held public forums via Zoom and Facebook so that the public could learn about our local candidates. Concurrently, we pursued legal action after recognizing that the government had months to formulate and enforce protocols to combat the spread of COVID-19, but did not have a comprehensive contact tracing strategy, did not activate a statistically adequate number of contact tracers, and did not do enough to protect marginalized communities. During the last third of 2020, we had 3 sessions regarding the legislature where we do much of our advocacy. The first was an annual session co-hosted with the Hawaii Alliance for Retired Americans to review and discuss the 2020 session with legislators. The second session was a meeting of our community affiliates to determine and prioritize our 2021 legislative goals. And the third was a meeting with our newly elected freshman class of legislators. In December, vaccinations were finally made available in Hawaii, and many of us hoped that the public health crisis would soon abate. So in January, we felt it was appropriate to meet with Dr. Victoria Fan, a health economist, a professor of health policy, and a member of the Hawaii Pandemic Applied Modeling Work Group, to address the challenges posed by COVID-19 and to get a data-driven sense of where we stood on the statistical curve of recovery. This month, as it appears that we have rounded that statistical curve with declining number of infections, we're eager to look ahead with the help of deep thinkers, visionaries who are known for their out-of-the-box but grounded thinking. Instead of introducing each of our speakers, I asked John Fink and Ikaika Hussey to introduce themselves to our audience and to share with us their visions. John Fink will be first, followed by Ikaika Hussey, and after both have had a chance to speak, we'll follow with a question and answer session. John Fink, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lila. Much appreciated, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Lila mentioned, my name is John Fink. I am the president and CEO of Aloha United Way, and I'm celebrating a whopping 9 months on the job. So yes, I actually did take this job on June 1st in the middle of a pandemic. Maybe I was insane, but I did know what I was getting myself into. But what a whirlwind it's been. A little historical background. For about 40 years, I was in the media and television side of the industry in Hawaii. I ran KHNL and KFIVE for quite a number of years, and I was there for over 30 years. But in doing so, I was also very active on a lot of boards locally. Up until I took this job, I was on 12 different boards locally. Most of which were involved with public service at some level. Longtime board member, former president, Big Brothers Big Sisters Hawaii, St. Francis Healthcare System. I'm still on the Aloha Stadium Authority, Hawaii State Junior Golf. I've been heavily involved with Easter Seals, and I've emceed hundreds of events over the years for a lot of charities. I guess you could say it's genetic. My mom and dad were heavily involved in giving back to the community, and they taught their kids pretty well. I have one sister who's a social worker. I have another sister who's a teacher. So I guess you could say it goes in the community. My wife is a hospice nurse, and my daughter is an emergency room nurse, and Ikaika knows them both. So anyway, it's something that I've always believed in. So when the opportunity came up after I'd retired from TV to take on this challenge of Aloha United Way, and I was approached before the pandemic, I thought that would be the one job that I would come back and do to give back to the community and help out as best I could. And then by the time everything got said and done, it was 6 months later that I was hired, and we were on June 1st. And it was like jumping, I won't say it was jumping out of the Titanic mid-voyage, because as we know, the Titanic went down. So that was not what I would do as my analogy. But it was certainly like joining in the middle of a fire and being asked to put it out. So with some of the questions that Lila and the group have put together, I'm going to give you some background on Aloha United Way. how we've dealt with what we've dealt with and what I see going forward, and then I'm happy to answer questions after Ikaika speaks. In considering the next chapter for Hawaii after the COVID era, I thought a lot about the kind of Hawaii we all want to see. Many things should probably change. I'm sure we would all agree. Too many people are working multiple jobs, yet still unable to make ends meet. Too many people are moving out of state, largely because of the cost of living being so high and the apparent lack of high skilled, high paying employment opportunities. We could name many areas that are pain points. But when we think about what could be, that's also when I get excited. That's why I got into this work. The Aloha United Way legacy has been built on more than a century of adapting to meet our community's greatest needs. Unlike much government work, the nonprofit and business sectors of our community can adjust, adapt, be flexible, and move quickly to make necessary changes and meet challenges. As we look over the next 100 years, we will continue to work toward creating an equitable environment where everyone is empowered, better able to thrive, able to weather acute and chronic hardship, and is continually striving to better their own community as they improve the life for themselves and their families. We also know that sustainable change cannot be developed in isolation. We must depend on supporters who share our common vision of a better life for our communities today and for generations to come. We need people of action, not just talk. We need selfless leaders, not so much worried about their own next gig, but rather more worried about the state and the community as a whole. That's why conversations like this one are so important. Ideas are shared and collaborations can be ramped up. Here's a little more about Aloha United Way, how it's contributing to a new and more resilient Hawaii. As a convener, we pull government, nonprofit, and education along with business together to advance the health, education, and financial stability of every person in our community. Our collaborative approach makes for a bigger impact, a collective impact. We collaborate with over 1,500 companies and 320 nonprofit agencies every year. In our daily work through our partners, we reach every part of the community, perhaps reaching over 700,000 people through our partner agencies and our own programs. COVID-19 has obviously exposed critical shortcomings in Hawaii's economy and in our systems of healthcare and education. Hawaii's most vulnerable households are being affected the greatest. Our programs are rising to assist those in need, and we're doing so even before the pandemic a year ago. These programs are able to quickly pivot at the moment, and they've often been able to do it through collaboration, creativity, and innovation. And oh yeah, money too. I learn from AUW's programs and our nonprofit partners every day, and I share this knowledge with legislators, friends, and business leaders every chance I get. I think much of what we see in the nonprofit sector has the potential to inspire and shape Hawaii's future. Let me explain a little bit about what I mean. ALICE is a concept that we use that a lot of other people use now, but it is an AUW program, just to be clear. ALICE funding is intended to affect systems level change in order to support upward financial for lower income families and individuals in Hawaii. ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. These are not homeless. These are not people without work. These are people who are working, but they are one missed paycheck, one refrigerator blowout away from being in financial trouble. They don't have the wherewithal or the deep reserves. Most of the people in this category, believe it or not, have been there since the 2009-2010 recession. They never got out of the ALICE situation. So while their incomes may have gone up and they're still gainfully employed, they have gone up just enough to keep up with the cost of living, and they have not put together what you might call a safety net or a nest egg or something like that to allow themselves to have the ability, if something goes south, to have reserves. And obviously, many people aged 60 and over are most susceptible to serious illness from COVID, which puts both ALICE seniors and ALICE healthcare workers at higher risk. More than 40% of Hawaii seniors have income level below the ALICE threshold, which is defined by the average median income based on how many people are living in your household. They have no extra income and little or no savings to cover extra healthcare costs. One of the sad things we've heard about as far as how have people managed to get by, many people in terms of rent and utilities have either borrowed from family or friends, or they've taken money out of their long-term savings, 401ks, and retirement plans. So they are literally robbing themselves to save themselves. And that's going to get costly as the years go on. Alice seniors are at high risk of loneliness and isolation, and as the pandemic has continued, they're also at risk of declining nutrition and health as social distancing limits trips to the grocery store and preventive care visits. As a good example, Waikiki Community Center, some of you might be familiar with it, they deal with 7,000 to 8,000 seniors a year. Since the pandemic began, they've been able to see 0 people in their facility. Many of those people live in the Waikiki area, which is the highest per capita over 65 population in the entire state, in that Waikiki area there. And many of those people depend on it for their dance class, their art class, their talk story time, their food once or twice a week. All that has gone away during the pandemic. So WCC has had to try to reach out to people, many of whom are not digitally savvy, don't do Zoom, aren't big on a cell phone. So they've literally had to knock on doors to check on people over the past 8 or 9 months, just in that Waikiki area alone, to give you a good example. When senior centers close, Alice seniors and their families must navigate additional burdens, such as taking on caregiver responsibilities and adapting to the loss of supports like hot meals and social activity. Key components of the Alice initiative include funding nonprofits to create programs that increase earning potential and/or reduce household expenses, improve access to benefits and community resources, and support development of financial capabilities and soft skills. These are all things that allow people to be self-sufficient and do it on their own. One of our Alice Initiative partner agencies, Goodwill Hawaii, provides a career readiness program with UH community colleges and vocational training providers to support Alice clients of all ages to access post-secondary education, job readiness training, financial literacy, job placement, job retention services, and tax assistance, all of which obviously are of vital importance. In response to the pandemic, they moved their support services online and encouraged clients to shift career focus to job segments that might be less vulnerable. Example, shifting away from hospitality to potentially healthcare going forward. Another area that you're probably familiar with that AUW is quite entrenched in is the 211 helpline. 211 is the state's information and referral service line par excellence, and yet it is not a state, nor a city, nor a government line. It is AUW's line, supported by AUW and its wonderful patrons. We do not get any money from the city, and we get minimal money on a normal basis from the state. And yet everywhere you go where they're telling people to call and check on things, they say, call 211. Those people have done incredible frontline work over the past 9 months, dealing with people who are dealing with financial loss, suicidal ideation, you name it, they've been doing it. We've had people call our 211 number and say, this is an embarrassing phone call for me to make. I used to be the person at my workplace who led the workplace donation drive for AUW, and now I'm calling because I need help. And there are some wonderful stories and success stories that we help people out with, but it is a 24/7 avocation right now, whereas it used to be pretty much Monday through Friday, 10 to 5. We are now at 24 operators. Before the pandemic, we had 5 operators. Requested 211 is up over 600% since the first week of the pandemic. As I mentioned, we've gone from 5 to 24 operators. We've gone from 8 hours a day to 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. Of 62,000 requests for referrals in 2020 at 211, nearly 8,000 were from callers over the age of 60. People can call, text, email, or visit our AUW website with inquiries for 211. The program has adapted to our current situation by leveling up in 3 areas. We increased our staff so we can handle the complex inquiries we're getting. And trust me, to be a 211 operator requires 3 or 4 weeks of training. We do not put rookies on there because we can get some very heavy and very serious phone calls, and you don't want just anyone answering those calls. Availability, as I mentioned, we've gone from 5 days a week during the normal daylight hours to 7 days a week. And we've upgraded our technology systems to give us immediate metrics about how community needs are changing week to week, so we can make recommendations to others about which services are most in demand. As you can imagine, in March and April, everybody called up going, do I have coronavirus? In April, May, June, July, they said, I need food. In July, August, September, October, we got all the calls about housing concerns. And now we're getting calls about vaccines. So it does change from time to time. There was one point in time in mid-October when the state reopened for tourism, we were getting 500 calls a day from the mainland, people asking us where they could go in their hometown to get a COVID test. Those are not the kind of calls we need to be answering at 211. So luckily our friends in the tourism industry started shifting those calls away from us so we could deal with really the priority calls, which are our local friends and neighbors. One of the things that we did with 211 that really illustrates that serving people in need often involves all three types of things: people, availability, and technology. Is we have caring and knowledgeable people, they're accessible and ready to respond, and they have access to the right tools. If I had to say one of the good things about the pandemic being that people can't all be crowded into our facility, it's that our 211 operators handling this heavy stuff are all working remotely from home. So from time to time, hopefully they can get up, stretch their legs, take the dog for a walk, put on their favorite song, which would be a lot more difficult if they were working in an office environment. So hopefully they're doing that, because as I've always told people, you can't help others until you make sure you take care of yourself. A third area you might be familiar with AUW is our safety net. We provide funding for basic human needs and support people experiencing a crisis. In 2020, one of our partner agencies, Lanakila Pacific, used their funding to provide additional subscriptions boxes to enhance service to Kupuna who were already involved in their Meals on Wheels program to help alleviate symptoms of chronic diseases that are impacted by diet. Again, our goal is to be preemptive and to work in a preventive manner when possible. We want to make sure people are fed with good stuff before they fall into disrepair or problematic issues. Our COVID-19 response work has been involved in distributing over $29 million in CARES Act funds for rent and utilities last year through our own AUW funded effort last April before anybody else had started one, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands that we put together with the DHHL, the State of Hawaii program, and a city and county program that all came together last year. Some of the questions I was asked is, you may be wondering, do I have hope for more future collaboration in Hawaii cross-section partnerships? And I go, yeah, I think that's the only way our communities will improve for every individual and every family. We don't need people going off on their own road, doing their own thing. We need people working in conjunction with each other, because there's strength in numbers, and therefore we won't be duplicating services if we work together with other entities. And interestingly enough, studies show that the next generation of young people want to work for an organization that makes the world a better place. And I don't mean that to sound all airy-fairy, but that's exactly what they say. They want to work in a company that will make the world a better place. So I hope the next generation will be even better collaborators than we are. They will be more willing to reach out across various sectors to find new technology and new solutions. Recently, I spoke with 200 students at Campbell High School through Zoom. My biggest concern was we don't even care after about 6 minutes what I had to say. And I was really thrilled with the energy coming from the students, and it was very much inspiring. They wanted to know where they could start helping out others today. I told them about volunteering. They could be a phone friend through a Kupuna through the Waikiki Community Center. Many said that they would be volunteering and maybe sending notes to people just to say, hi, Tutu, how are you? Here's what I'm doing at school. People love receiving things like that. I can't wait to see what they and their constituents are going to do in the years to come as we gladly pass the torch on to them in the next generation. Question was, what should be our recovery priorities? Well, at AUW, we prioritize working with others to advance everybody's health, education, and financial stability. They're all interconnected, and I think we can and should work on them all simultaneously. One of the questions was, how do we pivot at this point in time? Well, the old adage is, show me your budget and I'll tell you what your priorities are. So once we decide as a community what's truly valuable, will we be able to put enough into improving those things? Do we only value health, education, and financial security for ourselves and our families, or will we look out at the community as a whole? As individuals, we can take responsibility for ourselves, but we also need to give our time, resources, talent, advocacy, and if possible, money to help others. I believe that's one of the reasons we're here on this planet, is to make a difference, to reach out and leave things a little better than perhaps they were when we got here. This one I loved. It said, pretend you're the governor, or you're running for governor, the legislature, for Congress. What would your agenda look like? I'll never run for political office. I'd much rather help out in the private sector. So that'll answer that first part of that question. But in general, my answer would be what my friend, the director Spike Lee, once said with his movie title, do the right thing, especially for those in need. If a bill, a public-private partnership, or an executive action will help, let's not waste any time. Let's move these things forward. Let's not penalize those whose help is needed by cutting programs and funds. We all end up paying the cost in the long run in health costs, crime, social ills, etc. That's a no-brainer. It's been proven for hundreds of years. Another question, what is missing in the government's efforts? I think the government's doing what it can. I would tell you, having been involved in the CARES Act, the federal government wasn't giving good instructions to the local government. And I think what we've seen so far is the state is doing a wonderful job in the vaccination program. If you've been following it closely, every day there are more people available to give vaccines than there are vaccines available. And that's simply because we're not getting enough vaccines right now. I think Ray Vera at HPH said over at Pier 2, they gave 1,800 vaccinations and they could have given 4,500. I know that's the case at Queens. I know that's the case with the city entities over on the Windward side and other places. So the government is doing what it can. And frankly, as much as we had feedback on our program with the state last year in conjunction with Catholic Charities, I'm proud to announce that one of the entities that does the research on this found that the efforts by Catholic Charities and AUW made the statewide delivery of funds for people's rent relief in 2020 the most successful of any state program in America, as we gave out more rental funds per capita than any other state. I think there were 30 or 35 states that were involved in that. When you start from scratch and end up giving $60 million out in 110 days, it's pretty incredible. Ask anybody who's worked with a government program before. People working in the government, many people have every intention of serving the public, but they're in a difficult bind of getting money out quickly. That they have to prove to the citizens that they aren't taking advantage of the system. There's red tape, system bureaucracy, fear of reprimand, and it becomes very frustrating for everyone, not just those of us trying to help, but also those in the government. So I'm very empathetic to their plight. What can we do differently? Well, we can all think about ways to improve things for Hawaii beyond ourselves. That's the first thing. Not everyone can be like Bill and Melinda Gates, but we all have something valuable to give. A smile and a kind gesture is an incredibly valuable gift, and it can have ripple effects in a person's life. Those who have the means give by setting aside a portion of their belongings or savings for charity after they pass away. They can provide mentorship. They can share their time. They can be available to be a docent, a lecturer, or an ally. I have a father-in-law who's 92 years old. He's a docent at a botanical gardens. He's phenomenal. He's amazing. Others who have the financial means enjoy giving in the present day so they can see the impact of their gifts down the road. Speaking of the Gates, one of the components of their philanthropic philosophy is to give where they can see measurable results in real time and real terms. If they're going to give money for mosquito netting to prevent malaria, they want to see the results in 1 year to continue the program. I think it's a brilliant way. And when you think about Bill Gates, it makes sense that he would like to see results and statistical data. There's no wrong way to express your generosity. I'd like to remind everyone here that any action you can take to improve Hawaii for others is part of a collective action. It matters and it contributes to our culture, a very unique culture of aloha, ahana, care, and kindness. And then how do we move forward in a healthy way was the last question on here. Keep the vision for a better Hawaii alive by continuing to help others and act with generosity. We can't just talk about the keiki are our future. We need to prove that the keiki are our future. And we need to make sure we do that. And one final line I'll give you before I turn it over to my friend Ikaika is a line I've stolen from Harry Truman, president about 70 years ago. His line was great thing. I've kind of changed the tone of this, but great things happen when no one cares who gets the credit. Who cares where a good idea comes from? We don't live in silos. We shouldn't preclude ourselves from listening to other people. The best ideas often come from the least expected sources. So let's continue to collaborate and then take action where action is needed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, John. That was very inspirational. Ikaika, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hey, good afternoon. Is it afternoon yet? It's afternoon.
Yes.
Thank you, John, for speaking. You know, I just want to take off from where you left, which is that I agree. Ego is probably one of our biggest problems right now. We tend to trip over each other, and you have people of all different ilks and professions, trying to take the limelight. But really, we should be we should be trying to find just better ways of working with each other. And I just think that's such an important piece for where we are right now. Lila, if it's okay, I'm gonna share my screen.
Sure.
And we'll see if this works. Let's see. Keynote, okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Oh, that's the wrong screen. Okay, so I wanted to, hold on a second, sorry. Okay, so I wanted to start by being really upfront about my thesis, which is that we need a reinvention of our economy and not just a recovery of what we had in 2019. And I want to share a little bit about where I'm coming from. My family is from the Philippines on my mom's side. On my dad's side is from the Big Island and the windward side of Oahu. And me and my family, we live in Kalihi Valley. I went to school here in Hawaii and have been involved in local politics since the mid 90s. And let's see, done a little bit of writing on Hawaiian history. And I sit on a bunch of boards. I'm on the board of Faith Action. It used to be called FACE, or Faith Action for Community Equity. I'm the new president of that organization. I'm also the board president of Domestic Violence Action Center. I sit on the board of Honolulu School and a credit union. And my day job is I'm a labor organizer. I work with Local 5, which is the hotel workers union. And then I'm also working, I guess, as a second job, even though our motto at the union is one job should be enough. I do have a second job, which is I'm working on a startup around that's working on decarbonizing Hawaii's aviation industry. And we're building a large facility on the Big Island, which will essentially pull CO2 from the atmosphere and turn it into jet fuel. Sounds a little bit like Star Trek. I confess that it is a little bit like Star Trek. And I know we've all probably are spending too much time on Zoom, but I wanted to zoom out a little bit from the pandemic and kind of put it into a little bit of a context, which I hope is useful for our conversation today. And my conceit is that what we're experiencing with COVID is really just part of a much broader series of deep systemic problems that we need to confront very intently in this decade. So we have 2020. We all remember that year. It was a bit of a blur. And in that year, the top 1% amassed a wealth that is significantly larger than the bottom 50% of US society, at least. And here it is in terms of dollars. We have Jeff Bezos with $182.4 billion, Elon Musk with 126.2. And I find it really fascinating because at Jeff Bezos's scale, there's actually very little that he can spend his money on. If he were to spend $1 billion a year, he would still be a billionaire when he passes away eventually. And it's a fascinating situation where both Elon and Jeff, their plan is essentially to exit Earth. They want to settle other planets. I think that's awesome, but it does say a lot about the fact that our wealth, the wealth of our labor, the wealth of our communities is actually being used to, it's not being used here on our planet. Just another bit of our 2021 context. Just last week, I don't know, I'm sure many of you were also really concerned about family and friends in Texas. I certainly was. And the fact that we live in this incredibly affluent society, and there were dozens of people who died because they couldn't afford the electricity or there was insufficient electricity to warm their homes. And there are also stories, you can see this bottom headline there. This is a story from the New York Times about all these individuals who are having to pay very large electric bills because they tried to keep their heaters on during this massive storm. And here in Hawaii, we have a massive housing crisis we all are aware of. Housing is both unaffordable and also probably too valuable. You see this $999,927 house. It's for sale right now. It's actually in escrow. And that's a house in Kailua. Absolutely a tear down. Very, very expensive. And this is a piece out of my day job. You know, the hotels are slowly reopening. But the problem is that we find that our hotel owners are very reluctant to actually rehire workers. And so we're concerned that that hotels will rebound, that tourism will itself rebound, but there won't be the jobs that we all expect, which is really the only valuable piece of the tourism industry, the local jobs. So the rebound is expected within the next couple of years. There will be a few more election cycles in this decade. And then we know from the United Nations that we have up until the very end of this decade to dramatically cut our greenhouse emissions in order to avert major catastrophes for generations to come. And this article is a few years old now. We actually only have 9 more years. Okay. So bringing it back to 2021, to today, what I see is that we have a choice. We are on a path right now towards extreme inequality and a climate crisis, which our future generations will have to deal with. Or if we make some major changes in how we govern ourselves and the kinds of decisions that we make as an economy, we could push for actual equality and a stable climate for us to live on. So my thesis is that this is a time for us to make some big moves for our community, both locally in Hawaii, nationally, and globally. And I think that we should be, in terms of the recovery of the economy or the reinvention of the economy, we should be looking at major investments in the public sphere. So things like education. We still have an education system which was really designed to create plantation laborers. We don't really have a robust, certainly not a universal healthcare system. We have very expensive housing. I'd like to see us look at models like in Vienna, where they have social housing, which is provided by the states, by the municipality, with the goal of housing for everyone. And we need to look at our infrastructure. The example in Texas concerns me because we haven't yet in Hawaii had the kinds of dramatic climate events that other places have had, California, Australia with the wildfires, Texas with this ice storm. But we know that it's a matter of time before Hawaii, like Puerto Rico in the Atlantic, is going to be set with these sort of situations. So we need to look at resilience for the city as well as the people. I'd like to see us reinventing the economy itself. Our current industries are all basically aspects of real estate and land. We're building housing on land. We have a military industry, which is based on the location of Hawaii. And we have a tourism industry, which is all about bringing people to our land, but we're not actually creating new value with these industries. So I'm very interested in how we can produce new value, actually talk about reindustrializing parts of our economy. I was sharing this keynote with my wife last night, and she was giving me a hard time for using this acronym CCU. CCU stands for carbon capture and use, and it's a new technology that's just being rolled out now. It's part of the conversation around drawdown, around trying to actually reverse climate change by essentially pulling CO2 from the atmosphere and using it to make new products. You can make anything that you can make from crude oil from carbon from the atmosphere. And so, you can make plastics, you can make building materials, you can also make fuels. I think that's a fascinating industry for us to pioneer. We need to talk about building a truly circular economy, which is the kind of economy that Hawaii had for centuries and which we lost in the last 100 years or so. And we need to talk about investing in our people itself. Tourism is always going to be a part of the economy in some fashion, but we should be looking at a regenerative model for tourism. And lastly, in terms of the recovery, I think we need to talk about organizing. just in the past year, the union that I'm part of, Local 5, our national union sent, you know, and I should say we lost 99% of our membership because of the decline nationally of the tourism industry due to COVID. And what we did is we took those workers who are out of work and we had them door knock to enact political change. And so we knocked on 3 million doors in Arizona, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. And in addition to those 3 million doors that we knocked, we made 10 million phone calls. And then in the Georgia runoff, we knocked on 1.5 million doors in Georgia. And you know, I think it's so important to do this sort of old-fashioned organizing, because we live in a crazy moment now where the primary media that so many people are consuming is on their phones. It's Facebook and Twitter, but it's never going to be the same as their spouses or their neighbors. You know, we call it social media, but it's really personalized, individualized, algorithmic media. And so we're losing our sense of what is truth. And we see that certainly in the dichotomy between, or in the divide between, you know, the left and the right, but it's also in terms of just, you know, knowing what happened today. It's we're losing an element of truth that was much more present in frankly the good old days when you know, we had a handful of television stations and a couple of newspapers that everyone consumed. But those are the big picture things. I also think that it's important for us to make some small moves in terms of our local policy. I would love it if our state legislative leadership were to focus on raising revenue and not just cutting programs. I would love for the state Senate to push a bill which would require that the hotel industry rehire workers as the hotels reopen. We need, I believe, to use this particular moment when frankly cash is cheap, you know, through the abnormally low interest rates that, you know, I'm refinancing my mortgage right now for the same reason. It's also an important moment for us to look at the critical infrastructure programs that will make our community more resilient and lower carbon utilizing. And that's a very little thing, but I think a big thing is right now workers are trying to unionize within Amazon, which is, I think, where a lot of people are getting their daily goods. I think we should be supporting their unionization efforts. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ikaika. I would like to give an opportunity to both John and Ikaika to address any questions or concerns they have for each other. And if not, we'll go on to our audience questions and answers. Anything that John or Ikaika would like to say to either presentation?
No, good stuff, Ikaika. I've been following you for 25 years since I knew you as a small child, and you've come a long way, my friend. Good for you.
Thank you, John. I don't have any questions for you, John. Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, let's start with my colleague, Gary Simon.
So thank you. Thank you, Lottie. Thank you, John, Ikaika. John, I worked with your fine wife, Sherry, when I was a director of St. Francis Hospice. And Ikaika Herb Hussey was my senior dean at St. Louis.
Sorry to hear that.
Thank you. Just as much as government has an important role in relaunching us, reinventing us, it also has an important role in discerning where to stay out of the way. For both of you, either, and John can go first, either in principle or in a narrow example, where should government stay out of the way? Thank you.
I would say that when it comes to working on programs that government puts entities in charge that it believes can do it, once they've put us in charge, they should let us do our job and not micromanage. That would be the first thing I would suggest. I also think that there's a lot more flexibility in the nonprofit and business sector. So there are certain things that government, just because of the nature of the bureaucracy and the way it operates and the fact that it has full-time jobs to deal with anyway, can't do as well as outside parties can do. So there needs to be a level of trust there. And if the trust is not warranted, then the government shouldn't work with those entities that it can't trust. But I just think that getting bogged down in bureaucracy and red tape, some of it can be avoided. And I think that's important, especially when we're in a situation that is as dire as the one we're in now, where people need answers and resolve and results daily to make sure they can feed their families and provide shelter.
Thank you, John. Ikaika?
That's a good answer. I agree generally. I also think it's important to think about the various levels of government that we have. There are certain roles that I would like to see personally, for instance, our local city and county to have more responsibility for. And there's a lot of duplication between the various layers of government. I often think about, you know, like for instance, the fact that the city and county is the only entity that can do a real property tax. The state cannot, which means that the kinds of revenue options that the state has versus the city, they're kind of, I think there's a lack of connection there. So I guess for me, the bottom line is I'd like to see the city and county have more authority.
All right, thank you very much. Rick Tabor, your question, please.
Okay, hey, thank you a lot. Your presentations were remarkable. Actually, just what we were looking for, actually, I think. And it answered a lot of the questions. I tend to write a lot of questions out. I've just shared a couple with other people. I'm vice president here at Kokua Council, secretary on the board at Hawaii Meals on Wheels, and president-elect at HPGS, Hawaii Pacific Gerontological Society. And I've just been nominated and joining the board at the Rotary Club of Honolulu, and then a whole bunch of other things. So very active. Mental health is my background. And many, many years ago, out of grad school, graduated at University of Oregon, moved to Seattle Mental Health, worked at Children's Community Support, pretty intensive kind of work. We developed a wraparound model, which John was very much about tearing down silos and everybody working together, wrapping around the youth to try to maintain them in the community. And certainly we try to do that as much as possible with our kapuna here. I'm currently Generations Magazine Community Development Director, and I've just started some webinars with that very concept in mind, having everybody kind of network, come together, learn about each other, what they provide, and move forward. Everyone's real busy, so they don't take the time to do that. And then what I stumbled into in Seattle, unfortunately, was when managed care hit in the early 90s, all of a sudden everybody siloed again because they had to protect their own money. So they all moved apart. So just say that's where I'm at. That's what I've done for a lifetime. Started out here in Hawaii as a Navy hospital corpsman. I was field medical over at Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station. And my goal was to save lives, not take lives. So my heart is right where you guys are, John, and that whole giving back and service above self really is just what we're all kind of all about here, I think, on this page here. So my question is, so history being our best lesson, what have we learned and how will we integrate those lessons into our mitigation, remediation, and recovery? Because I just don't see us doing that. I think right now, you know, everybody wants to get back to normal, and in that haste to get back to normal, I already see people, they think they got the vaccine, they don't have to wear the mask, right? All that kind of stuff. How do we change that? And I'll start with John. Thank you.
Well, I'd love to tell you, Rick, that my first suggestion for starting any kind of change societally would be we need to do a better job in our education system. You get to people when they're 30, 40, 50 years old, and this goes for any level and all the problems we see around the country, you ain't going to see much change. Nobody wants to admit they're wrong. No, you know, and as Ikaika mentioned, the way social media is right now, I can spend all day listening to people who agree with me, and I'm going to be absolutely convinced that I am on the right and anybody else is either stupid, ignorant, or whatever, and that's no resolution. I think one of the things that is missing greatly, and I don't mean, again, I know the president has talked about trying to bring everybody together, but we certainly need more empathy, certainly in this state and in this country. People need to listen. I'm actually writing something about this in the next week or so. We need more people to shut up and listen to other people and listen to what they're saying and really hear what they're saying. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing is when somebody talks and you nod your head, but you're not really listening because you've already formed your opinion. And I think if we had more empathy for what people were going through, for those who don't want to wear a mask, talk to somebody who's in the midst of COVID survival. okay? I'm now 16 weeks, I can't smell or taste. So I guess I'm a long hauler at this point in time. Let me tell you what it's like for 16 weeks to not smell fresh air, not smell food, not smell the shampoo in a grandkid's hair. So you want to talk to me about, I did my part, I served my time? Not so, not so. And I know it's not intentional, but people are carriers. People, my wife got it, and you know, as a hospice nurse, as was mentioned earlier, she got it at a facility and 23 people got it. Every one of them was double masked. So if you think this thing is so obvious and easy to spot, it is insidious. And it will continue to do so until we get to that point where the vaccines are far enough out and we've handled some of the variants and we can tamp this thing down. But we are many, many months away. And if people think that they're superhuman because they had a vaccine and they could possibly still be carriers or be one of the 5% that maybe it's not going to work for, it's still going to be problematic. So I think, Rick, the first thing we need to do is listen to one another more often. And then the second thing we need to do is we need to start taking action on items and not just talk about the same things we've talked about over and over and over again. I heard Ikaika mention that too. We talk about stuff and we say we're going to do things for the right reasons. And then, as you mentioned, everybody goes back and does their own thing and things don't get accomplished. So we really need to have action plans as part of these discussions when we collaborate and put timetables on things, because that's how things end up getting done.
I really appreciate that. So I'm doing RILA. I'm the co-chair for Oahu, and we're doing a virtual all-island RILA this year, which is Rotary Youth Leadership Awards. And that's started in the late 60s in Australia in 1971. The Rotaries internationally, 60% of the Rotaries started doing this with youth. So we're actually taking juniors, sophomores and juniors, and we're teaching them leadership skills through Rotary principles. And this year I'm actually teaching, I'm actually doing the negotiation triangle. And it includes listen mindfully, not judgmentally, mindfully listening, taking it in without judgment, thinking critically and moving forward. And so we're going to split into a student council. Each of the Ohanas, which will be 7 people, will be a student council, and they're to come up with what we do for fall of 2021 for schools, using the negotiation triangle and thinking. So just teaching those principles. So I think that's great, John, everything you said. So, Ikaika?
Yeah, you know, Rick, I'm not optimistic. John, I'm really sorry to hear that you and your wife were hit by this. That's really unfortunate. And I think what you just said about how we need to actually execute, that's really the critical thing. We need to be able to have a plan, like for instance, for vaccination, and just execute it. And I think this goes back to the question that Gary was asking. Who can best do the execution? If it's the government, if it's a state government, if it's a city government, if it's a private entity, whoever it is, whoever can get this done fastest, that's the one that we should be giving the money to deploy these solutions in our community. Because the faster we get to that point, the better. I had a kind of a frightening experience the other day where I was in Waikiki, and Local 5 was doing. We were doing an action. We were doing a beach cleanup, and we were talking with tourists about the importance of a safe reopening of tourism, that it needs to be done in a manner where we protect the health of the guests, of the workers, and of all of our local families. And I met a local couple, and they came up to me and they made it very clear from the first of all, they weren't wearing masks, which was actually really common in Waikiki, walking down the strip. So that was not the immediate, tell. But they started to, when they came up to talk to me, they started to say, we don't believe in this COVID thing. We just think everyone should just get exposed, and that's the fastest way for us to get to, to herd immunity. And I thought, oh my God, these guys, they're dangerous. And they were coming up to me and talking to me, and all I had was a mask on. And I'm thinking, if I get exposed, then I have 3 children, I have a wife, and so I took 2 very large steps back, and I said, I'm going to talk to you from here. As you can see, the rest of us, here on the beach, we're all wearing masks. We think that that's the way to move. We want us to actually be safe. We're taking this incredibly seriously. So So Rick, I'm not optimistic. And you know, to John's point about education, I think there's another educational institution in addition to our schools, and that's actually the press, the media. And there are some really awesome news organizations that are committed to truth, and there's some which are committed to, you know, to just getting viewers and have less of an obligation to journalistic integrity. So there's a real problem there. You know, we all need to be on the same page with regards to what is real and what isn't.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I try to be optimistic, but also realistic. Change is very hard. So being in mental health for 45 years, virtually nobody changes unless they really want to change. And certainly if we're not hearing the truth, and if we're believing what we're hearing, then that's going to make it even more difficult. So the work becomes even bigger, if you will. So that's my question. And your answers are great. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead, Lila.
Thank you, Rick. Jim Shon, you're next. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yes. Okay. I would like to pivot away from, which is a natural wringing of our cultural hands of what's wrong now, to a little bit more what Ikaika was talking about, and that's reinventing. And if we're going to reinvent segments of our society, I always think about what institutions or businesses or agencies do have the power, the strength, the influence, the leadership to reinvent themselves, to reinvent us. And so this is a question about who you see out there in the private sector or government agencies that need to be really pumped up with more resources, authority, leadership, flexibility. I specifically would like both of you to address what you think of, say in 5 years, the role of the university and its ability to reinvent itself to help reinvent us, and any other private sector folks like Sullivan and Internet, OceanNet, I mean, that you see out there that are positive potential forces for reinventing what we do, how we do it. To me, the question is, identifying the problem is one thing, but who's going to do it and how they're going to do it. Agencies, businesses, these are the ones that are the building blocks of movement in my political science view. And so I'd like to ask each of you to talk a little bit about who's out there, what's out there that we need to really reinforce that can help us reinvent ourselves. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ikaika.
No.
Jim, I would say that there are companies out there. I'm not savvy enough to know a lot of these tech companies. I mean, just hearing what Ikaika's guys are doing on the Big Island, there's a company that's, you know, getting some capital investment, which is obviously key. And if it can have some clout and decision makers involved to move things forward, as long as people who don't see this as a threat to their industry don't get in the way, which tends to be what happens in the business world, is that people see it as a threat. You know, it's hard to make systemic change when the system has to be changed by the people from within. You know that as being a legislator. You know, I hear people talk about term limits all the time. Well, unfortunately, the people who would have to vote on term limits are the people who are not taking term limits. So that's a kind of a dead issue unless the general public demands it. So I think there are examples of that. My God, look at what Apple did from a nondescript company. And then when Steve Jobs decided to get into things like music and cell phones, it revolutionized the world. And that was a company that was trailing horribly at one point to Microsoft and all those other companies. And so I do think there are players like that out there. And I do think we have some people like that. I'm not going to compare anybody locally right now to Steve Jobs, but I do think those are the type of people who see their own entities and can figure out a way to get support and come up with a business plan on top of the social plan to make it viable. I think on the energy side, I can't think of a better place in the world that can better figure out how to get us off of the carbon heroin than Hawaii, with wave power, cold water power, wind power, volcano power. You can go right down the list of things, but there has to be a business model and there has to be the willingness to make it work over time. I think that would be a great help for Hawaii going forward. I think the whole tourism model is in need of some systemic movement. We can't just keep bringing bodies in here. And anybody who's naive enough to think that when the pandemic ends, that the tourist who was paying $200 a night is going to be so pent up, they're going to pay $400 a night, so we can charge more money and have less people and everything will be fine. That isn't the way the economy works. Every hotel is going to make 5 nights, get 2 free, because they're all so empty right now. They're going to do whatever it takes to bring people in. And I think we have to realize that that system is not going to change in and of itself, because all these people are highly leveraged with banks and they need to see bodies back in their hotels. And so the idea that we're going to go from 10 million people paying $1,200 average a night to 8 million people paying $1,500 a night, I don't think that's going to happen in 2022 or 2023. So we're going to have to figure out ways to do more with ecotourism and adventure tourism and all those other things we've heard about, and make it more of an experience for the next generation of travelers who, if I'm reading it right, they want more out of their workplace in terms of giving back and being part of society. And I think they're going to want more out of their vacations to feel like they're part of something and get something more out of it than maybe my generation or the generation before me did. So those are just a couple of places I see where it might come from.
Thank you, John. Ikaika, any thoughts?
Jim, can you clarify? Are you? Yeah, I mean, explain your question. Are you thinking about in terms of like a sociological lens?
No, I'm not talking about sort of a cultural, broad social view. I'm talking about institutions and agencies, which I think are the building blocks of major social change, whether it be a company, but let me hone in a little bit on the university, for example. Many people look at the UH as a retail educational thing for local students. But universities in their broadest sense, particularly look at Manoa, are actually engines of change, policy change, but also nurturing all kinds of new research as a major sector. You had said that most of our industries are service oriented, or rather bringing in folks, but you know, healthcare is a big industry in Hawaii. It's a big one. And it is not just serving us, it's serving the Pacific. A university can be serving much more beyond our shores as an industry. We have a curriculum research group that could be doing, which we could invest in as education as an industry. These are the kinds of things I'm wondering about. And I think there's a kind of sense government, wherever they are, can't do it. But if I was looking at an institution that might have the possibility of helping to reinvent this, it might be the UH. And I'd kind of like both of your thoughts on the UH as whether that's hopeless or hopeful.
You know, I think the kind of mental separation that you're making between the University of Hawaii as a place where I go and learn something, you know, I take a class, versus an institution that conducts original, pure research. That's a really useful distinction. And I think it's even more useful in a world where essentially you can have the access to the world's information in your pocket. You know, I took a bunch of classes during the pandemic on Coursera and all these online platforms. I learned a lot of stuff. I never set my foot into a classroom. And I can only imagine that is the trend for the future. That's the trend line, you know, is for education and for learning to be increasingly personalized, consumable, you know, on an individual basis through smart devices. And you know, Jim, I don't know, I haven't thought about it too much. I think it's an interesting idea what you're proposing. And you know, certainly it's not like a brand new idea, right? There's absolutely a lot of money that flows through the university, and it does incredible work. And and you know, just in my own sort of dalliance with climate science, you know, as a total non-scientist, I'm fascinated with the way that like, for instance, that the way that scientists work together. You know, they collaborate in a deep, profound way across institutions, across continents and oceans, in a way that I think we could learn, that the rest of the society could learn from. You know, talk about not being ego driven. I'm certain that there are egos within the science community, but yeah. Right. You get a few people with PhDs. I'm sure they got some ego, but it's really fascinating. You know, and also the way that the internet has become another, you know, plane of collaboration. I think that part, I think, bodes well. You know, kind of to step back from what I was saying to Rick earlier, I am enthusiastic about that. The kind of the open source knowledge that we if we're really interested in something that we can benefit from.
Yeah, Jim, I would just add that I think the university would be a great starting point. I think the university does get hundreds of millions of dollars every year, which I don't think most locals even realize in terms of research money, and there is some great work there. My concern is how embedded the UH is because of its dependence upon the legislature. How independent can UH be as an institution of creativity and proactivity when it's also dependent and sometimes micromanaged by the very people that help fund it?
Yep.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trope, right? The hearings about what what the university is doing. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I also, you know, just want to throw out there, I saw a presentation by the head of OceanNet recently to the Pacific Asian Affairs Council, and what they are doing in so many deep areas of science, including COVID and carbon and everything else, all being based in Hawaii. It was an amazing opening into possibilities that we can do it here, but we have to ensure that we encourage them to stay here and to
Oh,
thrive.
and we've had 2 Nobel Prize winners this year from Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right.
That's in the sciences, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Barbara Service, do you have a question?
Yes.
Barbara? Thank you, Barbara.
It may have been answered, but let me ask anyway, please. How can we help Hawaii's fastest growing population, which is our kupuna? Can you give me some specifics on how that might be accomplished?
I would tell you that one of the places I know you can reach out to, Barbara, is the Waikiki Community Center, which does a lot of work with kupuna. And those folks can also tell you other entities. And to go back to what Rick was talking about before, one of my biggest concerns coming out of this whole pandemic is the PTSD and the mental trauma that people have gone through with this oppressive 12-month or longer pandemic situation. You know, I always talk to people about when you look at AUW or the Red Cross and stuff, and you talk about what are the things that are going to get Hawaii. And you would have said one of 3 things probably: hurricane, tsunami, or earthquake. And the difference between that and the pandemic is all of those things would be over in a day. And then we would rebuild and start over again, but we would know that we were done with it. This thing doesn't go away, and it has been very oppressive on single mothers and kupuna and people who can't see their loved ones and things like that. One of the things I worry about is what are we doing as a state from a mental health standpoint? And this is the whole smattering of age group, but certainly with seniors, many of whom are alone, some of whom don't have family here, aren't technically capable. And I just want to make sure that we are doing everything we can in our volunteer efforts to reach out and at least touch base with these people, which we know is hugely important from a psychological standpoint. So the first thing I would tell you, Barbara, is get in touch with Waikiki Community Center and go from there, because there are other entities like them, but they're one that I know is doing some really good work reaching out to people.
Thank you. Ikaika?
I'm just thinking about my own family situation where we have my grandmother who lives with a family with my aunt in Kaneohe and live in Kalihi, and I just try to visit her as often as I can, you know, to spend time with her, because John's right, you know, a lot of our elders are isolated, and you know, no one likes to be isolated, right? I think there's also an aspect of this which is about how we design our communities. I would love to see us build housing in such a way where our elders are not physically isolated from, for instance, children and, you know, their own grandchildren in many cases. And it plays into the ways in which we do permitting at the city and county level, the kinds of financing which is available to developers, you know. And so it's a very systemic problem, I think, in terms of how we've imagined how housing works. You know, there's 3-bedroom houses over here in this community, and over there is housing for, you know, for our elders. And so I think we need to deal with that particular piece at the policy and political level.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Doug, are you ready? Doug Matsuoka?
Yeah, I'm kind of reading from the official instructions for this. We're supposed to introduce ourselves briefly. So just let me say that I'm Doug Matsuoka. I'm a volunteer director at Kokua Council. I work for Hawaii Meals on Wheels, and I helped start Hawaii Guerrilla Video Hui back when portable live streaming of video was a very esoteric technical skill. I have a question. Ikaika kind of touched on it, and that is focusing on the recovery. You know, we use a figure for the gross state product a lot, and I've always thought that metric sucks because it doesn't really have too much to do with the people that I'm concerned with whom I call us, you know, people that live here and are out on the street trying to make a living. So my question is, do you see a way we can live a good life in Hawaii without depending on the 3 biggest contributors to the gross state product, which is the military, tourism, and real estate? And I'd like to add a comment from one of the directors here who couldn't be here today. And he says that nothing will replace tourism. And this is a quote: "Were it not for tourism, we'd be trading with stone money." And I'm hoping that's not true. And what do you see? And either one of you guys can grab it first.
Who said that?
I'm not telling.
Well, the reason I react the way I am is that I was just recently having lunch with Walter Heen, Judge Heen. I guess it wasn't recent, it was 2 years ago. But, you know, one thing that struck me about the conversation with him is that he was recounting about how when he was in the legislature, and this was in the 80s, or I'm sorry, in the 70s, at that point, they were pushing for tourism as a new industry, something that the state could use to replace its previous dependence on monocrop agriculture, right? The point, though, is that we've had an economy for a long time. Tourism is not like the one idea that we've had. You know, we've had a succession of some good, some junk ideas about how to live here. And so I would push pretty hard against someone who says, you know, it's tourism or not, tourism or nothing. That's just ahistorical. Okay, John.
Yeah, I would say that we need to find more complementary things. I mean, I've been pushing for a Mayo Clinic Hawaii with an East-West Center. I've been pushing for the Cancer Center of Hawaii to become world renowned by bringing in Eastern medicine. There was a time I was told where Elon Musk was looking at building a rocket farm on the Big Island. And he got so frustrated, he said, the heck with it. And he ended up going to Texas or wherever he went. But I mean, we can't afford to let every opportunity go because we just don't think it fits perfectly with what we'd like to see. Obviously, sugar and pineapple ain't coming back. As Ikaika mentioned, we have had other economies of scale here, but we do need to find more complementary economies, not just for the business sense, but to give our local kids a true sense that there's a future here for them and that they can not only afford to stay here, but they can find themselves growing and becoming part of Hawaii in so many different ways. So I do think there are options, but we really have to have the will to do instead of just making a blanket statement about it, because we hear that every 2 or 3 years. Every time there's a flood in Japan, we hear they're not coming, we need to change tourism. Every time there's a recession on the mainland in 2009, we hear we need to replace tourism. And then it comes back and we go, hey, this is pretty good. I guess we don't need to do much of anything, do we? And the concern, Doug, and I'm sure you feel it too, is are we losing some of the essence in Hawaii because we're not taking care of our own by doing that? And one of the arguments I would make is one of the great things about tourism, if people choose to experience it when they're here, is they learn what aloha means. And if they can take that back and we can translate an aloha, which is meant to be shared, can be sprinkled around the rest of the world, I'm naive enough to think what a better place it would all be. So I kind of see the both sides of it, but we definitely need to supplement, complement, whatever you want to say, what we've got right now, because adding another 1 million or 2 tourists, it's going to be problematic. You know, I started thinking, well, wait a minute, if a quarter of the people or 20% of the people are working from home on a going forward basis, there'll be less traffic. So we shouldn't blame tourism for traffic. It's been locals that have been doing most of the traffic. But hey, if there aren't as many people on the roads, traffic might never get as bad as it was before. So a lot of things to be seen with people working from home, which will absolutely be part of our future. But we do need to come up with more complementary or supplementary businesses which have some stickiness to them that they'll last for a long time.
Yeah, John, I'm glad you spoke because it gave me a minute to regroup and to get over my anger about Doug's quote. And so, you know, I wanted to share a conversation that I had with an entrepreneur friend of mine who lives in Sacramento, and he was talking about how in Sacramento the thing that they're dealing with is the realization that Sacramento is just kind of it's just like you know, San Diego or San Francisco. It's just a little bit less expensive, and I think that's actually increasingly the case. Is that our communities are sort of fungible, right? And they're fungible from the vantage point of 21st century industry. 21st century industry is increasingly knowledge based. It's about being able to plug into a very fast internet connection and to connect with your work, and the work is in the cloud. It's on a server farm somewhere. And so the specific things that my takeaways from that are, I want my children to all learn coding. I want everyone's kids to learn coding because that is the primary skill set of the 21st and probably the next several centuries, right? Is being able to understand how to create, you know, silicon-based products. The second thing, though, is that we need to invest in the things that make Hawaii a good community, such that we can have our children continue to live here, and also, you know, recruit really awesome people from other communities to come and live here as well, if they want to. And those elements are things like good urban design. It's really good schools. It's a really good healthcare system. It's a clean environment. It's good beaches and, you know, mauka areas that are thriving. It's a good food system. It's all these elements which make a really wonderful society. And I think in the 21st century going forward, we need to think of Hawaii not just as, well, we need to think of Hawaii as being part of a globe. You know, that's really what it is. So there's that piece, you know, being a good place for the global knowledge worker, quote unquote. And I hate to use those sort of catchphrases, but it is accurate, I think. And the other thing is I'm really bullish, Doug, on building a new class of local industry. I believe in local food. You know, I think about the fish ponds that once encircled this island, all of our islands, which fed our communities for 1,000 years. And a lot of those have been covered up. They are now suburbs. They are now, you know, they're now housing or golf courses. But the question that I like to ask is, where do we put the next 20 new fish ponds such that we can have a thriving aquaculture industry for, you know, to feed our people for centuries to come? You know, the fish pond in Heia, it's 800 years old. It's a massive, these fish ponds are massive feats of engineering. I don't think that the rail is the only big project we've done. We've done big projects for centuries. And if we're going to disconnect ourselves from that history, I think we're missing a lot of context about what islands can do. So I would like to see us kind of re-embrace that piece of our past, bring it forward, you know, do new things possibly with those fish ponds, and also to build new of that class of infrastructure. I'm also really enthusiastic about energy, you know, like what John was saying. I've already spilled my enthusiasm around like the carbon piece. You know, it's an incredible set of technologies that we can deploy to make products here. So yeah, so Doug, yes, we can. Absolutely.
Thanks for doing that. Just to end, my dream is to have some kind of metric that doesn't use the financial standards, because that misses a lot of stuff like fish ponds. And you know, we'll call it the Doug Index if I'm still alive and figure it out. But,
or domestic labor.
Huh?
It completely misses domestic labor. You know, your love and caring for your children is excluded from the GDP. It just doesn't exist on that particular spreadsheet. But you know, I know as a parent, I spend a lot of time taking care of my kids, and I hope they benefit from it.
Thanks, guys.
Well, thank you very much. We've run out of time. At this time, I'd like to give John Fink and Ikaika Hussey a few minutes for their closing remarks, starting with John Fink. John?
Yeah, I thought about the closing remarks, and I thought there isn't much left for me to say. I heard Ikaika talking about coding, and I love the idea because I'm a huge proponent of education. I think the more people truly understand and learn about facts, we won't be in a post-truth world any longer. But I would also caution that I am really tired of this becoming an appendage for the human race at the expense sometime of interpersonal contacts. Coding is great, but if someone says, "How are you?" and you can't answer the question because you've spent 20 years coding, I think we need to realize the human touch is still, at the end of the day, what's going to differentiate us and what's also going to drive us. And I also think what Ikaika said is very true. Let's not forget that as we raise our children, so we raise the citizens for the future. So we as parents and grandparents need to do a damn good job making sure that our kids grow up with respect for one another and for the wonderful nature of things that we have here in Hawaii, and make sure we don't get caught up in other things, because that's the relay race. We pass the baton on and they're now in charge. We need to make sure we give them all the tools. They can choose to do what they want, but as I've always told my kids, when you learn and you learn more about more stuff, you have more options in life. And life is a lot more fun when you have options and you're not forced into something and you regret what you didn't do when you were younger. So we need to make sure we give our kids options, and that includes education, and make sure they take care of each other, because at the end of the day, that's all we've got.
Right. That's right.
Thank
It's it's that social intelligence, which is ultimately that's the thing that's going to push us forward. It's the thing that will allow us to move forward. You know, we started off this conversation by talking about, ego and, and folks sort of getting in each other's way as we try to move forward as a community. And I think increasingly, that the solutions for our future are not money and it's not technology. It's really us. It's us as a society being able to work together in hopefully better and more harmonious ways. Thank you very much, Lila and Kokua Council, for inviting and inviting us to come in and hang out with you during this lunch hour. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ikaika. It was really heartwarming to hear that the solution for our future lies in our humanness. And I like the strong emphasis on education too. Thank you very much. Mahalo to John and Ikaika for sharing, for joining us today and sharing your visions. It was truly an honor to learn from both of you. And I'm sorry that this program ends so abruptly, but I think I warned you that when I hit the end button for our Facebook, it cuts everything off. Please take care of yourself. E malama pono, aloha, and mahalo. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.